We will win the elections and continue to dominate. There will be less photos and videos in this episode as requested by my slaves. Relax and listen to it. My fans will watch my surprise celebration party soon, just after an adequate number of fans. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Welcome to the darkness and world of Fascinate vampire Lilith. In a world veiled from human eyes, Lilith, the last of a line of vampires with a unique resilience to sunlight, reigned with a quiet, calculated power. Her mastery of fashion became more than a career, it was her chosen weapon, her entryway into the lives of the powerful. Across America, Lilith's models immortal women as breathtaking as they were deadly slipped through the highest circles of influence. These beautiful creatures, protected by her sun-shielding designs, mingled seamlessly in exclusive events, charming and captivating the nation's most influential figures. To Lilith, men without power were nothing more than sustenance, a means to fuel her strength. But men of status? These were her true prizes, her pawns in a much larger game of control. Lilith's models, alluring yet relentless, ensnared politicians, CEOs, and military leaders alike. Even though they couldn't turn these men into vampires, their beauty and supernatural charm drew them in, binding them under Lilith's influence without their knowledge. Lilith's hold over society was growing, her influence spreading like an invisible web as her vampire army charmed their way into the hearts and minds of America's elite. But Lilith's ambitions were rooted in something deeper than mere conquest. She was driven by a desire for revenge, a thirst to fulfill the legacy of her fallen father, a vampire who had met his end at the hands of an ancient rival. The extinction of her kin had left a scar upon her, one she planned to heal by bending the world to her will and feasting on those who held the power that had once defeated her family. Yet, as her empire expanded, a new player entered her realm, a mysterious businessman, Karean, color-eyed and magnetic, with an influence nearly as potent as her own. At first, he intrigued her, he moved within her world as though he belonged, yet he wielded a power she couldn't quite place. He approached Lilith with promises of partnership, a shared vision to elevate her brand, and with every meeting, his presence stirred something unfamiliar within her. Lilith found herself drawn to him, yet a whisper of caution lingered at the edge of her thoughts. There was something in his gaze, something ancient, almost alien. Despite the intrigue, her instincts, honed over centuries, urged her forward, guiding her to trust in her own mystical power. She sensed that he might possess the insight, perhaps even the strength, to take her empire to heights she had never dreamed of. As their connection deepened, Lilith's own forgotten fears began to resurface. Memories of past battles and warnings of ancient enemies that her father had once feared crept back into her mind. She had heard tales of beings that moved in shadows, creatures that could rival even her own kind, but she had dismissed them as distant threats. Now, with each glance at this man who seemed to know her every secret, she couldn't shake the feeling that her past was lurking closer than ever. Yet, despite the growing unease, Lilith leaned into this connection. She, the queen of darkness and beauty, could not be swayed by mere suspicion. Trusting in her mystic power, she allowed herself to be drawn closer, fully aware that the darkness he carried could very well be the final piece she needed in her quest for domination. In the recesses of her mind, Lilith remained vigilant, sensing that a reckoning was on the horizon, one that could reshape her world. But for now, she embraced the thrill of the unknown, welcoming whatever fate awaited her as she delved deeper into this alliance. And somewhere, in the shadows, the last alien survivor waited, knowing that his patience would be the key to her undoing or perhaps the beginning of something far more powerful. Following the initial thrill of her alliance with the mysterious businessman, Lilith threw herself back into her work, orchestrating grander, more exclusive fashion shows and opulent parties. Politicians, CEOs, and military elites flocked to these gatherings, enchanted by Lilith's allure and the irresistible charm of her vampire models. These events were more than just spectacles, they were calculated moves, designed to place her models directly in the lives of the nation's power players. Each smile, each drink shared, tightened Lilith's invisible grip over the country's elite. Among her attendees were high-profile figures whose judgment seemed to wane under the model's influence. Slowly but surely, they fell into Lilith's control, their decisions and allegiances swayed by the mesmerizing vampires who graced her parties. Her empire continued to grow, each encounter adding to her strength as her models subtly guided the nation's future, ensuring Lilith's vision of power took shape. Meanwhile, the enigmatic businessman Kaelan maintained a close association with Lilith, presenting himself as her ally while subtly pushing his own agenda. Despite the dark allure he shared with Lilith, Kaelan was no vampire. He was the last of an alien race, a being who had survived eons by blending into the shadows. His goals aligned with Lilith's on the surface, but in truth, Kaelan had his own designs for the world. Rather than outright destruction, Kaelan envisioned ruling humanity with calculated control, amassing an army of loyal humans who would obey him without question. Kaelan's charm and persuasive abilities were unparalleled, and soon he was attracting followers from every corner of society. Promising power and wealth to those who joined him, he crafted an army, a force of humans who would serve his purpose and aid him in his goal of controlling the world. His followers knew only his surface identity, the influential businessman who could offer them more than anyone else, and they never suspected his alien origins. Lilith and Kaelan's relationship was a complicated dance of ambition and power, a silent war in which each sought to outmaneuver the other. They both understood that, while they needed each other for now, the ultimate prize lay in holding the world's reins alone. As their alliance deepened, so did the underlying tension between them, a growing rivalry that thrived beneath the surface of their shared ventures. With each party Lilith hosted, her vampire models gained greater sway over politicians and CEOs, tightening her hold over society's elite. And with each passing day, Kaelan recruited more to his cause, humans unknowingly drawn into an alien's quest for dominion. Both Lilith and Kaelan moved carefully, aware of the other's power, yet unwilling to strike until the right moment. Determined to secure her growing empire, Lilith expanded her influence under the guise of philanthropy. She founded a chain of high-end hospitals and medical centers across the globe, even reaching into war-torn regions where blood donations were plentiful. These facilities operated as symbols of charity and medical innovation, seemingly committed to helping those in need. But beneath this facade, Lilith's true purpose was far darker. The hospitals were a sophisticated network for collecting and stockpiling blood supplies for her vampire models. Promoted as initiatives to help underfunded communities and combat global blood shortages, her hospitals encouraged donations on a massive scale, rallying support from the public and political elites alike. The blood flowed freely, arriving at her facilities in constant supply. Thanks to her carefully built relationships with the elite, the hospitals attracted substantial funding, ensuring that her blood banks overflowed and that her vampire models never went hungry, no matter how widespread her influence became. The media lauded her efforts, and politicians, dazzled by her charm, publicly endorsed her charitable work. Yet those close to her parties, and deeply entrenched in her network, knew that her philanthropic empire served a far darker purpose. Behind closed doors, Lilith's hospitals were stocked with meticulously preserved blood, and only the finest supplies were offered to her models, sustaining them as they continued to seduce and control the powerful. Meanwhile, Kaelan observed Lilith's growing influence with a wary eye. The Vampire Queen's network was sprawling, her subtle control over global leaders impressive. As he expanded his own army of loyal humans, Kaelan couldn't help but admire her cunning. But he, too, had plans that required blood though not for sustenance. To ensure his own longevity and his human followers' loyalty, Kaelan began to experiment with small doses of his alien power, sharing it with his closest confidants and forging a force he could unleash if necessary. As Lilith's hospitals opened in ever more regions, her reach grew, and Kaelan's followers multiplied in secret. Their uneasy alliance became a high-stakes game, each careful not to expose their ultimate goals too soon. For Lilith, the hospitals symbolized her empire's endurance. For Kaelan, they were a reminder of the power he needed to harness if he hoped to match her strength and achieve his own vision of global control. As Lilith and Karean amassed wealth and influence, they each set their sights on a new goal, the upcoming presidential election. Both recognized the strategic importance of controlling the nation's future leadership, but their methods diverged as sharply as their personalities. Lilith, with her allure and refined network of connections, chose to influence the election from within the establishment. Using her vampire models, she charmed the leaders of prominent political parties, bending their will with promises of support and unrelenting beauty. High-ranking military officials and bureaucrats fell under her sway as well, with their spouses and companions each unknowingly influenced by Lilith's models nudging them ever closer to her will. These men and women, entranced and intoxicated by the subtle power of Lilith's influence, aligned themselves with her preferred candidates, unknowingly supporting her hidden agenda. But while Lilith played within the polished corridors of politics, Karean took a darker path. Far from the glimmering lights of society, he built his influence in the streets, embedding himself within the underworld. He took control of drug and arms trafficking networks, his growing army enforcing his rule with ruthless efficiency. Through his alien charisma and quiet intimidation, Karean brought the crime syndicates, street gangs, and underground networks under his command. Dealers, gang leaders, and the elusive heads of international crime rings now took their orders from him, supplying him with money, power, and a strong grip over the nation's underbelly. As the election drew near, the battle for influence reached a fever pitch. Lilith, entrenched in political circles and high society, pulled the strings of her network, watching as political leaders pledged loyalty to her preferred candidates. Karean, meanwhile, fortified his power on the streets, using the fear and loyalty of his criminal underlings to spread his influence and ensure loyalty to his chosen candidate, subtly undermining Lilith's plans from the shadows. Their paths continued to diverge, but the tension that simmered beneath their alliance grew even more intense. Lilith saw Karean's actions as an affront, his army a crude tool compared to her elegant web of influence. Karean viewed Lilith's reliance on charm and beauty as a weakness, one he could exploit when the time was right. And yet, both understood the other's power and respected the silent threat it posed. With the election looming, they became two rival titans in a complex game of influence, each maneuvering carefully, building their bases, and strengthening their allies. They knew that if either was to claim ultimate control over the country and, perhaps, the world, one would eventually have to destroy the other. But for now, they continued their dance, locked in a subtle, silent war. As the presidential race intensified, Lilith and Karean threw everything they had into ensuring their candidate's success. For Lilith, this meant crafting her grandest and most exclusive fashion show to date, an event disguised as a fundraiser for her chosen candidate. Held in a lavish venue filled with political elites and high society figures, the show shimmered with elegance. Her vampire models, dressed in gowns that seemed woven from shadows and moonlight, moved down the runway, leaving every guest captivated. As donations flowed, Lilith's subtle influence washed over the crowd, cementing loyalty and gathering funds that would propel her candidate forward. Meanwhile, Karean employed darker tactics, using his underground network to strike fear into the supporters of his rival candidate. His forces, a network of enforcers, crime syndicate leaders, and ruthless gang members, prowled the streets, a silent yet pervasive presence. They whispered threats, targeted families with unsettling messages, and made their influence known through subtle but chilling displays of power. Karean's reach extended beyond political circles and into the very lives of his opposition, ensuring they thought twice before crossing him. His actions were a stark reminder that, in this race, the stakes were deadly, and loyalty was to be earned or forced. As election day approached, the city buzzed with tension. Lilith's glamorous displays and growing political influence clashed against Karean's shadowy intimidation. Both knew that this election wasn't just about placing their candidate in office, it was a step toward total control over society. Every move brought them closer to a final showdown, and the victor would hold the world in the palm of their hand. Lilith's ultimate vision stretched far beyond the presidential election. She yearned for a world where she reigned supreme, where every corner of the earth served as a feeding ground for her ever-growing army of vampire models. She envisioned men in positions of power as mere puppets, ensnared by her model's allure and enslaved to her will, fulfilling her long-brewing desire for revenge against humanity. With each influential figure she ensnared, Lilith moved closer to transforming the world into a place where only her models held dominion, bending society to her desires and reshaping it to her twisted vision. Karean, on the other hand, saw the world as a chessboard on which he could enact his vengeance through chaos and conflict. By driving the world's nations into endless wars and chaos, he aimed to weaken humanity and drain them of their spirit. He manipulated his network of illegal organizations to infiltrate politics and spark dissent, crafting alliances with arms dealers and warlords who would tear at the fragile stability of society. His endgame was to destroy Lilith, whom he saw as a twisted mockery of true power, and to conquer her from within using his dark army, striking when her influence reached its peak and humanity lay helpless between them. For now, they were both tethered by a tense alliance. Lilith continued her glamorous defile and parties, weaving politicians and corporate giants into her web, while Karean tightened his grip on the underworld, sending ripples of terror through society. They both sensed that their partnership was temporary, a tool to fulfill their personal vendettas. In time, Karean knew he would rise from the shadows to strike Lilith, and Lilith was prepared to counter him, turning even his allies into willing slaves. As the race for the presidency reached its climax, both knew that their schemes would not end there. The election was merely the first step in a calculated game for world domination, a game that neither would abandon until only one stood triumphant, ruling over the ashes of humanity. Thank you for following Lilith and subscribing to her YouTube channel.